Everything that I'm about to say is from conversations I had yesterday and today with 9 sources around Northwestern baseball, ranging from former coaches, people close to the program, current and former players. Additionally, I spoke to the man at the center of the allegations, current baseball coach Jim Foster. Quote, sometimes the right thing to do is not the best thing to do, end quote. That's what Monique Holland, the chief of staff to Northwestern athletic director Derek Gregg, allegedly said to Northwestern trainer Josh Keister when she was asked why Jim Foster wasn't being fired back in February. Northwestern baseball coach Jim Foster has created a toxic environment in the program that has run off coaches, broken the spirit of his team to the point where they likely will not be able to field a full roster this year, and was the subject of an HR investigation that found him to have violated university policy by engaging in bullying and abusive behavior, making an inappropriate comment regarding a female staff member, and speaking negatively about his staff to other staff members. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. He was also alleged to have made comments that were racially insensitive and discouraged members of the team from seeking medical attention for their injuries. The university report did not find enough evidence to corroborate those allegations. However, the university did not speak to any players on the team while investigating those allegations. I did. And I have the specifics on all of the above allegations, which I will get into in a minute. A player also told me that he was the subject of a punishment run of nearly the entirety of a 2.5-hour practice. That is both appalling because it is an NCAA violation, and also because Foster was at Rhode Island when a baseball player died after a rigorous practice workout in which the university paid out the family a $1.45 million settlement. Multiple other players confirmed that the run happened in the fall prior to the HR report being filed. That is noteworthy because there was more monitoring of Foster throughout the year after the HR report. One player said Foster said in the exit meeting, quote, next year is not going to be fun, implying that once the observational period was not there, he would be able to coach the players how he really wanted to. The other piece of the story is about how Jim Foster got to Northwestern in the first place. The first coaching hire of new athletic director Derek Gregg, who, along with his chief of staff Monique Holland, pawned the hire off to 2 prominent Northwestern boosters, Eric Magentale, who has his name on a building, and Laird Koldyke, who the field is named after. These 2 men played for famed Northwestern coach Ron Wellman in the 80s. He was a bit of a disciplinarian, and they thought that getting a guy from West Point would help these kids overachieve. I contacted Magentale, who refused to get on the phone with me, but texted, quote, I am just an avid fan of Northwestern University and NU athletics. Also, as a former player of Northwestern baseball, I very much want the team to succeed as a top D1 and Big Ten baseball program, and especially as a lasting and positive experience for the young men in purple and white, like the experience I had from 1980 to 1984. Coach Foster has the same objectives. I sincerely hope that you share those objectives in reaching out to me. I wish you luck, but respectfully decline to comment further, end quote. Suffice it to say that our objectives are not aligned. Also, Northwestern went 10-40 in Jim Foster's first year as coach. I'll leave it to you to be the judge if the players are having a, quote, positive experience, end quote. 15 players are currently in the transfer portal to leave Northwestern, and one prominent player who has long ties to Northwestern and loves Northwestern, who is also leaving, said, quote, the reason is Jim Foster. It's important to note that Jim Foster has always been Jim Foster. He has never had an assistant coach with him longer than 2 seasons. I'll repeat that. Jim Foster has never had an assistant coach with him longer than 2 seasons. West Point was thrilled to get rid of him despite 4 consecutive trips to the postseason and being named the 2022 Patriot League Coach of the Year. There was reportedly a celebratory Zoom among the Army team that he was finally gone. One former staffer said to hear Jim Foster speak, quote, is like he's on an episode of Cops. I have no idea how he could have impressed in the interview, end quote. A player told me he's, quote, ashamed he represents Northwestern University, end quote. The hiring process was described as, quote, chaotic and highly unusual, end quote. There were apparently 3 finalists for the job. Many turned it down, and Foster wasn't one of them. And then Gregg allowed 2 influential baseball donors to sit in on interviews and basically handpick their guy with little to no vetting. One source close to the program who predates both Gregg and Holland said, quote, they are so clearly in over their head. So now to the allegations of the investigation. Let's start with the specifics of what Northwestern did find Jim Foster guilty of, which led to Greg's chief of staff, Monique Holland, going on a trip with the baseball team and the university monitoring his behavior this season. One former coach said he spoke with a member of his staff at West Point who said it sounded like Northwestern got off easy, likely because Foster was being monitored starting early in 2023 after the initial HR complaint was filed last November. 1. The inappropriate comment about a female staffer was that he said a manager could not be on the field because, quote, I don't want guys staring at her ass. She can be up in the press box taking notes, end quote. By all accounts, she was a great manager, and this meant that she could not feed the pitching machine, chart bullpens, and participate in on-field work. One player said she really wasn't around the players as much this year as in the past, and another said it felt like she disappeared from the team. 2. Bullying and derogatory comments about the staff. I'm combining these two because, frankly, there were too many examples that I got to count. Screaming at coaches in the dugout, saying players suck because you suck to a coach in view of the whole team, using foul language constantly, telling a coach that everything in life he had gotten was handed to him, not showing up to winter practice at all, no plans for practice when he did show up, quotes to a volunteer coach who said that he was going to be working a camp in the offseason to pay rent, quote, do you want to make money or do you want to effing recruit, end quote. I talked to people with a lot of experience who refer to themselves as, quote, grown-ass men who had been around Northwestern and other programs and working for a lot of coaches, and they said they had never been spoken to like they were by Foster. Now to the allegations of racism and discouraging members of the team from seeking medical attention. Again, no players were talked to during the HR investigation into Jim Foster, but I spoke to roughly half a dozen. On the counts of racism, I spoke to a player who said that one of his black teammates did not feel like Foster exuded acceptance, and he didn't feel comfortable wearing a chain or a do-rag under his hat around Foster. In a recruiting meeting, Foster asked a coach if he would still be advocating to recruit the player if he was white. The coach said yes. Foster said that he wouldn't, implying that the player was only being recruited to fill a quota. Another incident at a camp where he referred to an Asian player as, quote, the Chinese kid when he wasn't Chinese. Foster blew off mandatory diversity training for the team to bring them to Wrigley Field when he threw out the first pitch and was dismissive about the worthiness of doing it. He said that one of the black players on the team was the only one with rhythm on the base paths. And he made a comment about the kids not needing to dress nice at a Mexican restaurant that one player took as being insensitive. Now to what is, if I can editorialize for a second, perhaps the most damning. The idea of how Foster handled the medical issues on and around the team. He addressed the entire team prior to a fall intra-squad game when a player showed up with a pulled muscle in his neck and said, quote, Josh is not your daddy, end quote, referring to the trainer, Josh Keister. A coach told me that pitchers absolutely hid injuries from Foster and started to go to see Josh, the trainer, away from the field. One player, according to a coach, had an elbow injury that he's working his way back from. He was told that if he wasn't back by a certain date, he wouldn't be able to play. He pushed it and ended up needing Tommy John surgery. A player told me that Foster told multiple upperclassmen that they should just quit if they were not back sooner than their expected return date. A coach said, quote, when you send even a mixed message to a 21-year-old kid about if you see the trainer, you won't see the field, it confuses the player. If they feel like the head coach doesn't want them to see the trainer, it's insane. You're talking about someone's health and well-being. It's baffling, end quote. One person close to the program said that a now former player is considering legal action against Foster. I contacted the player, and he said he had too much skin in the game, had no comment, but gave me the number of a bunch of people to talk to. The coaches made repeated attempts to meet with athletic director Greg, and they actually internally did end up being the whistleblower with the HR report that they filed back in November. They were repeatedly, however, denied a chance to meet with Greg himself. I spoke to Jim Foster for about 30 minutes this morning. He repeatedly called this a hit piece. He said he disagreed with the findings of the HR report, even the parts that they found him guilty of. Of coaches' complaints, he said, quote, maybe they wanted the job. You ever think of that? It's been 25 years since Northwestern has had a winning program, end quote. As to the players being upset, he said, quote, maybe the players aren't good enough and are just making excuses or disgruntled. Maybe it's how they're raised. Could be any of that stuff, end quote. On the allegation about what was said about the female manager, he said he just noted that at West Point, the female staffers had to wear the Army uniforms, but at Northwestern, they could wear the tight baseball pants. He mentioned having 3 daughters, including one with autism, and that he would never be disrespectful to women. On the allegations of racism, he called them, quote, ridiculous, end quote. He also noted that his best friend at Northwestern is the soccer coach and one of the people in facilities, and they are African American. He denied trying to dissuade players from seeing the trainer and that, quote, people can say whatever they want, end quote. He repeatedly mentioned that he came from West Point, where you need to have the highest of standards, and he felt that maybe people still feel like they can pile on because of what's happening with the football program. So now I will circle back to Monique Holland's alleged comment defending keeping Jim Foster back in February in the first place after the initial HR report. Quote, sometimes the right thing to do is not the best thing to do, end quote. And I ask, is Northwestern doing the right thing employing Jim Foster as its baseball coach?
Woof. Goodness. Well, first of all, that's some really good journalism by you. You clearly dove in yesterday and had a ton of conversations with people on and off the record, giving you some incredible context. What a toxic program Northwestern baseball is, and what a terrible person Jim Foster seems to be, as I editorialize on the back end.
No, right. So now I will editorialize. It's been an insane day and a half. I got a tip, and I talked to the person, and I was like, is there anyone who can corroborate this? And he gave me half a dozen names immediately. And then I would call the next person on the list, and I would talk to him, and I'd be like, can you give me anyone who can corroborate this? And they'd give me 3 or 4 names, a couple of whom I didn't already have. And then I would talk to the next person. And
so this is a story that was yearning to breathe free. This was like sitting there waiting for someone to find.
Everybody that I talked to, with the notable exception of Foster, wanted this story told, and frankly felt like they were not heard and validated with their formal complaints at Northwestern, if I'm speaking of coaches with the HR stuff, or players in their exit interviews who finally have been able to speak with the athletic director, but the feeling is that Greg has basically been a ghost, that people do not know where he is, what he cares about. He says all of the right things about caring the student athletes, but that he is defending his first hire and thinking that this is the disciplinarian that was hired from West Point and complaints are going to be natural. So I've never really reported anything quite like this because it's one more damning thing after the next, man. 15 players in the transfer portal, guys passing up the opportunity to get Northwestern degrees to go to lesser academic institutions because they can't stand the thought of another season with Jim Foster. And they thought when they gave their exit interviews that he was going to be gone. And he's still there. He's still on the website. And
they may not even be able to field a team, you said. Like 15 players in the transfer portal because they hate the coach and the environment that he has created. People who have wanted to play for Northwestern a long time, probably.